Explore the vibrant arts and culture landscape of Michigan, a state with a thriving creative ecosystem that has birthed iconic movements like Motown and the Purple Rose Theater. Home to legendary musicians, writers, and artists, Michigan boasts a rich tapestry of cultural heritage known worldwide. Michigan Creates is a podcast series that will connect listeners with gifted artists and cultural institutions that are nurturing Michigan's vibrant creative landscape. Welcome to Michigan Creates. I'm your host, Ara Topouzian. You know the phrase, if these walls could talk? Well, I think about that when I go into the historic landmark, the Music Hall, which is located in downtown Detroit. I can't even imagine to think of the artists, the nationally, internationally recognized artists that have come to Detroit, that have been on that stage at Music Hall. And so I get to talk to Vince Paul, who not only runs Music Hall, but has a vision for what the future holds for it. As he puts it in the interview, music brings people together. And so we're going to talk to him on what he is doing and what is going to be seen in downtown Detroit in the very near future. Join me as I talk to Vince Paul. Vince, it's great to talk to you and great to see you. I haven't seen you, or we haven't communicated in such a long time.
Yeah, it's been a couple of years. Yeah, for sure.
A couple of years. I like the beard, and you're aging nicely.
It comes and goes.
It comes and
It's
goes.
winter.
It's winter, so it's always it's that time of year. Well, hey, look, it's great talking to you. You've got a lot to talk about because you've got a lot of exciting things happening in Detroit. But first and foremost, I want to talk about your background and all the normal questions of where were you born and where did you go to school and all that kind of fun stuff. But really the meat of this interview is going to be what's going on with Music Hall, which
Sure.
is your domain. And you've done some fantastic work with it over the years. And anybody that's from Detroit or Michigan that doesn't know what Music Hall is and what it does and the type of venue and the work, I mean, really are missing out. So hopefully today we'll give a little bit of a spotlight. But let's start with your background,
Well,
getting into this.
yeah, you bring up, a good point. My return to Detroit
Right,
it wasn't all about the music hall.
right.
The music hall just became a flagship for a much larger effort. So
Yeah,
yes, I was born and raised in Detroit. When I was a little kid, I was on the west side of Detroit, a little street called Steele, and then my parents moved to Farmington Hills, and I graduated there, and I went to Michigan State University. I always wanted to do theater since I was a little kid, so I was
yeah,
in the theater department at MSU. And then in one of my maybe sophomore year, I became stage manager for the Joffrey Ballet Summer Intensive in Grand Rapids, Michigan. It's where I met my wife, as a matter of fact. So most of my career, so then I was able to segue that job to New York, and I was just kind of working my way up. Everything from sound design, lighting design. Hey, listen, I sew costumes. I do anything there is to get a toehold into Broadway, and Broadway was great. But I found Broadway to be limiting after a while, because here's something you don't think of, that Broadway really only does United States, UK,
Hmm,
maybe some Japan. But I really wanted to travel the world, and I found that if I would stage manage, symphonies or dance companies, all of a sudden you can pretty much travel to China or to Germany or to anywhere, by
right.
using those two mediums. So I ended up touring an awful lot. And this is relevant to the musical story, because I traveled to 50 countries, all 50 states. And as I was traveling, my career was advancing. I was stage manager, production manager, tour manager, executive director, and I would see all of these great artists all over the world, and I'd be like, wow, I got to show my mom the National Ballet of Spain, and I have to show, the people back home, Dance Cuba or the Moscow Circus or whatever it was, and nobody was importing those artists into the United States at that time.
Okay.
So I was able to open my own agency and sort of carve a niche where I was importing artists from all over the world, and that became my niche. And so I would end up scheduling tours in the fall and in the spring all over the United States. And Detroit was bread and butter,
Mm,
because I could bring my shows. To the Opera House, to Music Hall, to the Detroit Symphony Orchestra, Orchestra Hall, plus they had, some festivals. And since Detroit is so diverse, it seemed like everything I was importing, there was an audience for.
okay.
And right. So when the trustees of the music hall inquired, like, would you ever consider coming back to Detroit and running the music hall? My thought was, well, listen, I'm interested in healing my hometown, because I'm now seeing it from a distance.
Right.
And I'm like, wow, what happened here? And I think I had a clue. Yeah, because Detroit isn't one city. It's more like 25 towns, like cultural background towns. And people had really fallen into their silos, and they really weren't communicating or doing commerce with each other. They were kind of living in independent micro villages, and I felt that the performing arts had a role to play there in sort of bringing everybody back together into one body politic where we can accomplish great goals, but we have to work with each other outside our silos. And so the trustees really liked this idea. They were like,
Mm,
"Oh, so what are you proposing?" I'm like, "I'm proposing that music hall become a flagship, if you will, of multicultural programming. We become a true reflection of who actually lives here." Because most organizations, they cater to single demographics, and these are the people that they need to please, and these are the programs that will please those people, so they're kind of going down single lanes, which is not helping. It's
yeah.
great, don't get me wrong, because we have to struggle in the nonprofit world, and you got to do, but our mission was not to make music hall great. It was to make the city of Detroit great. The mission continues to be Detroit. Now, the music hall has that role to play, if you will, of gluing people together. Because as you're going to see maybe our resident orchestra, the National Arab Orchestra, you're going to pass by a poster of an Indian comedian or a Bollywood show, or
Right.
maybe a Tyler Perry play, or maybe a Jackson Brown concert. All of these are appealing to different demographics, but you're slowly and repetitively, you're getting it through your mind that, oh, wow, there's lots of people who live here and like different things. Maybe I should try this out.
So
And
did
I
you
say,
have this like vision of what music hall could become before you even,
I
were,
did. I,
yeah,
I did. And I actually wrote a lengthy business plan
yeah,
because the trustees asked, well, why don't you put those thoughts on paper? And I did. And I know this was 18 years ago.
right.
Um, and I didn't know that I had that all bottled up inside me, of all the years I had been in show business. And I'm looking at ideas of how they do marketing in Munich and how they do fundraising in Fayetteville, Arkansas. It had accumulated, and I don't think I really knew that it had all accumulated and stuck in my head until I sat down at a little table at my friend's house in Paris, of all places. He went to work, and I sat at his little table in his little kitchen, and just I banged out an entire business plan. Like, if I ran the music hall, this is what I would do.
Wow.
And
That's
and
interesting, especially, I go back to as you're talking about this. I mean, this is all very top of mind. I'm sure it was 20 years ago when you were thinking of this plan. I find it interesting how you say Detroit was the bread and butter for all of these acts. I think some might find that, or maybe some may be skeptical of that or find that interesting to hear that Detroit. What can you briefly talk about
Sure.
before we go into music hall? What sets Detroit apart from other communities? We'll call it that.
Great, great. Because another large part of it is Detroit to know oneself, right?
Hmm.
Detroit has the best selling, most attended entertainment district in the country, maybe the world, right?
Oh, yeah.
We have four sports teams, three arenas, seven theaters, all within a 500-yard radius. Ford Field has more seats than all of Times Square times four.
Hmm.
It's really a very misunderstood. And so, Music Hall, I might add, has presented more performing artists in its 96 years than perhaps any theater in America. We can't find one that is more prolific than the Music Hall. So why is that? Well, I think we take it for granted that we really are into the performing arts. We have produced more performing musical legends than any community in history, right? I mean,
Right.
we have this unusual affinity for live music and the arts. The Nederlanders are from Detroit. They own half the Broadway houses, you know? So I find it interesting that we don't know this about ourselves.
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
that we go to it's just when you're a kid, your older brother takes you to see a Doobie Brothers concert when you're like 12 years old. That does not happen in Everytown, USA. It's really woven into our culture. It's like a rite of passage that you go and see a live concert by the time you're 12.
Yeah. So let's talk then now about maybe the history of music hall just a little bit, to give folks
Sure,
kind of a snapshot. You just said it's close to 100 years old. I mean,
it is.
yeah, what's
It's really
different
the
about
longest continuously running theater, certainly in Michigan, but one of them in the United States. Everybody has a dark period here and there. Music halls never closed.
yeah.
And the reason is that it would evolve. And in fact, we have this great archive gallery on the fifth floor that you can walk through the history of Detroit and Detroit culture simply by looking at the programs that music hall was putting on in the 30s or the 50s or 70s So uh, in the beginning, it was built by Matilda Dodge Wilson. That's John Dodge's widow.
Okay.
And when he died and his brother died, Horace died, she became the wealthiest lady in the world, or certainly in the United States. This is 1920s wealth. So she and I might add Horace's widow Anna Dodge. Together, they sold the Dodge Motor Car Company to Walter Chrysler, and so there's a little history lesson on autos. And so she built the music hall. She also built Meadowbrook. She was the first female lieutenant governor of the state of Michigan. This was a really active, important legacy for the city of Detroit and the state of Michigan. Would be Matilda Dodge Wilson for sure. Anyway, she made a couple really major decisions. One is that this will be the finest theater or performing arts center in the world, and
Mhm.
it was when it opened in 1928. Two, it will have open access. That is to say, in the elite of the day, you weren't getting Italians and Polish and German and African Americans. Not the case at the music hall. It had open access, same quality seating throughout the entire hall for everybody. And the reason I find myself doing what she was doing is because they were programming for all of these different demographics
Right.
that were living in Detroit. So we have Cab Callaways and we have Enrico Caruso's, So and I might add, the person who had my job would be Florenz Ziegfeld. He was doing all the booking because she hired him to do all the booking for the music hall. And so that lasted for about 20 years. And then along came World War II, and the DSO moved into the music hall and they did the Ford Sunday evening hour. And many people are familiar with the Fourth Sunday Evening Hour because it came on right after FDR. He gave his fireside chat on Sundays at 7 o'clock.
Right.
And directly after FDR's fireside chat came the Fourth Sunday Evening Hours. It was broadcast coast to coast, even
Mhm.
internationally. What people don't know is that that was the DSO on the music hall stage.
Okay.
And that went from 39 to 49. And then came the rage of Cinerama, which was shot with 3 cameras, and it's kind of a precursor to IMAX. So music hall evolved into Cinerama, and we had the first surround sound that was built by Walt Disney Studios, and that lasted for 20 years. And then came Michigan Opera Theater. They moved in, and we created Michigan Opera Theater until they raised funds to build their own opera house just adjacent to the music hall,
Mhm.
50 yards down the street. After that came Tyler Perry. Tyler Perry, he started as a playwright. People don't know this. So between the Fox in Atlanta and the music hall in Detroit, we created Medea, which became a very famous character. And
Yeah.
then he went Hollywood and did Meet the Browns and television, and now he's got an enormous film studio of his own. And so after Tyler Perry, that's when the trustees were like, okay, what do we do now? And that's when they came across myself. They have a new they chose a new chairman, and then the chairman and I really saw eye to eye. His name's Alex Parrish, and we've been together all this time now for 18 years about this multicultural programming. How can we use this legendary hall to its fullest?
Right.
Um, and so it really was about the city of Detroit. How can the performing arts heal a community? And the great thing about this plan that we crafted back in the day, we went from maybe a $3 million a year annual budget to a $14 million annual budget. Because when you start to play in everybody's sandbox, it just got a little bit more, and we got a little bit more market share. We weren't limited to a 250,000 person demographic. There's 5.5 million people that live in Southeast Michigan. And so if you're able to just capture a little bit of market by really understanding everybody who lives here and program something for them, and you do it repetitively, well, we just grew that institution. Now that corresponded, I might add, to Detroit's rise. If you come to downtown Detroit, and you haven't visited in 20 years, you're in for a big surprise, Ara.
True. It's grown quite a bit.
Oh, yeah, I think it's an American story. We have the NFL draft coming in a couple weeks here, and there's so many national events that are now focused on Detroit. I don't think there's another downtown like it really in the United States. I suppose Times Square, but if you really sort of put all the puzzle pieces together, you have a very walkable 1 mile with tall
Yeah.
skyscrapers and all the restaurants you could ever want, and the retail and the theater and the sporting stadiums. And there's no other sort of, if you're going to spend 3 days in Detroit, well, you don't need to rent a car. You come in from the airport, you come downtown, and we will entertain you in that 1 square mile, and you'll never repeat yourself.
Yeah, I think it's terrific how you expanded that programming, within music hall. I mean, to your point, it increases that reach, and you've become
Yeah.
now inclusive, really for everybody. You mentioned some of the icons, Vince, that have kind of passed through music hall over the years, but name some other folks that we know. Aretha Franklin, is
Well, I
certainly part of that.
inherited Aretha Franklin when I arrived
Okay.
because Aretha, she used to go to her father's sermons
Right.
at the music hall. And so she really grew up at the music hall. So what people don't know is that was really her rehearsal space.
Hmm.
And I produced many, many of her shows in her final days, including the one that was free to the public because we knew that she was getting ill. So, I talked to her. I said, listen, we need to have one big, giant free concert to the people of Detroit. And we did that in 2017, and she died in 2018. I'm so happy that we did that concert. That was a big deal. And there was 20,000 people there, and we did it in the streets right in front of the music hall. So, boy, it's almost every name you can think of
Yeah.
naming, as at one point or another, been at the music hall. Um,
All right. Well, I
I
won't put
di-
you on the spot. You did
don't
mention
put me on the spot because we do so many shows,
yeah.
You're kind of a deer in the headlights. We do 400 events a year
Yeah.
across four venues.
Yeah.
Um, right, which is every day. And then very often you've got two or even three or even four all happening on the same day
Right.
at the same time, right?
I mean,
Because
it's
if you look at the venues, that also corresponds to the reach out of the demographic.
yes.
When we built the 350 Terrace nightclub on the roof, initially the trustees were like, "Whoa, what are you putting a nightclub on our Art Deco, treasure?" And I'm like, "Now wait a minute, those 25s to 35s, that's a demographic that we need to serve as well, and they're going to inherit this town, and they need to see this point of view."
Right.
Well, that worked. Ara. It
Yeah,
worked so well that we're gonna, we're building a new building, very 100,000-foot expansion next to the music hall. So that was a no-brainer to
yeah.
make sure that we expanded the 350 Terrace in the new building.
So let's talk about that. So I've been in music hall a number of times. I've played in the cafe a few different times. I mean, it is a remarkable building. I mean, we have so many remarkable historic buildings in Detroit, and certainly music hall is one of them. And if memory serves, I've only been in your office once, I recall, and I do remember thinking, boy, this is like an old timey Broadway producer's office. I remember
Yeah,
correctly. I just
like the
remember
Ziegfeld
the
office.
Ziegfeld office exactly, going all the way upstairs and all of that. It was, I do remember that. So it's not hard to imagine. Okay, the folks at Music Hall came to you and said, "All right, Vince, what's your vision to create?" And then somewhere along the lines, you really start building on that. Certainly now with the terrace, and then now let's talk about this massive undertaking that's going to take place right next to the existing building. I
Yeah.
almost want to like let you go and describe it. I mean, it's I've seen the drawings and the pictures and what this is going to really create, but talk about what that vision is.
Well, we've always had this parking lot next to the music hall, and that parking lot, it's a surface parking lot on the corner of Randolph and Madison, you know, across the street from the Detroit Athletic Club, across the street from the Harmony Club. It's this parcel that 40 million people drive by every year. So
Mm,
it's a very, very visible a parcel, piece of real estate. And I would say, and I've said to many people that if we really rebuild Detroit, it's a good idea to do things in sequence.
mhm.
And right now, the perception of Detroit very much is guided by Madison Avenue, that street in front of Music Hall. It's got the Opera House on it, and Ford Field on it, and the DAC on it, and the Harmony on it, and everything's on that stretch that
Right.
everybody goes by. So as as we have renovated that street, people are painting the whole town, with the perception, which is okay. Okay, that if that's the rules of the game, well, then we need to make this street look great, because perception matters. It drives economy. And that one parking lot there, no good. Okay, that's not a good reflection. So we started thinking about what would be the best program that we could put on this very, very highly visible parcel of land. Because it's not going to be a parking lot, and it's not going to be a CVS, and it's not going to be I don't know what. So the music hall locked up that parking lot years ago with
Mm,
an intention that one day we're going to develop that parcel into something that is very, very important for the growth of the city of Detroit.
okay.
What it did is it turned out to be an extension of our mission, multicultural programming.
Yeah.
And so I would say that we have been developing um, the program for 10 years, at least the seeds of the idea. And then in earnest, 5 years, we really started to look, well, what gaps can we fill in the city's programming? So there's 12 businesses that each have their own business plan. It's a mixed use facility, but they all tie back to music
Yeah.
because, right, if you're going to build a tourist attraction, you want to go with what people are already have in their mind. I mean, you can go to Timbuktu and say the word Detroit, and they're going to tell you cars and music, right?
Yeah.
So
Well, music
we're
brings
like,
people together. I mean, you've said that before, and I think that certainly makes
it
sense.
ties into multicultural programming. It's
Yeah.
a it's again, I don't want to say it's a social glue. We all like music. We just like different genres of it.
Right.
But if we present all those different genres, well, then you're meeting new people and you're seeing new ideas. So that carried over from the musical. Now we're just going to blow that up times 10 in this new facility. I will say that some of our music infrastructure. I mentioned earlier that we produced more performing arts legends than any other community, but we've lost a lot of music education in schools. This is true all over the United States, but we're the music capital of the world. We're going to have to fix that, because it's really woven into who we are. It's our identity. So there's a nonprofit academy in there, where yes, we will teach you the clarinet, but more than that, we have industry offices there. So we will teach you recording techniques and engineering. It's got a recording studio in it. We will teach you law, sync rights, merchandising tactics. It has record companies in it. It has management in it, agencies in it. It's really consolidating a lot of the industry offices that are around Southeast Michigan, but are very difficult to find because they're fragmented and sporadic.
Right.
So we're condensing a lot of that just into one place. There's a building in New York called the Brill Building, and it's very much like the Brill Building. That's where Tin Pan Alley is. That's where you find your music agents, and that's where you see artists, shopping the hallways, knocking on doors, trying to shop their tape. And so we wanted to give a place where you could go and shop your tape, easy to find. And while you're at it, sure, we're going to build out that 350 terrace to accommodate even more 25s to 35s. We're going to put a restaurant, probably. I guess it's kind of like a Hard Rock Detroit. It's a restaurant that features memorabilia from everybody from Eminem to Aretha Franklin and everybody, Bob Seger's and everybody in there, Iggy Pops and all of our stars. There's a great activated alleyway because Detroit's been building this network of alleys.
Yeah.
So we have a north south and an east west alley that features an exhibit that's free to the people, where you can dial up a biography of everybody from Marvin Gaye to Madonna. And I think that is something that people expect to see when they get to Detroit, but we don't have it yet, but we will. So it was really sort of answering the call of these different gaps that I think people thought we had, but we just didn't.
Right.
So
Bring it
one
all under one
obvious
roof.
thing, yeah, in fact, the Welcome Center, we don't have a welcome center. So, okay, we have a really cool welcome center. And I might add, in that welcome center is an all venue ticketing outlet where you could buy a ticket to anything from a Lions game to an opera. But what it does is it puts all of Detroit on display. We think about the building as it's you, Detroit. We're here to promote your institution. We're going to show you where the Motown Museum is. We're going to show you all of the programming that's happening in like this month span. You can even buy a ticket to it at a discount, very much like TKTS in Times Square. These are just best practices that you find in other cities. So I can't say that we are revolutionary or creating anything. We're just kind of bringing good ideas that have worked
Yeah.
all over the place and putting them all together in one single place. Well, what really took it to a whole new level was the architect who came on board,
Yeah.
as we were, searching for, okay, who's going to design this icon building.
Hmm.
We came across Todd Williams and Billy Shin in New York, and they're really dominant architects working in the world today. They're doing the Obama Library in Presidential Center in Chicago. They just had finished Geffen Hall, which was like at Lincoln Center. And Todd Williams is from Detroit. Who knew? And he'd never designed anything in Detroit before. And like so many of us expats coming back to the city, he just really took this project and ran with it. And he created something that is unique on the planet Earth, and that took us to a whole new level of funding and attention and everyone who's involved in this, the entire development team, are the best at their craft.
Yeah,
They're the best in
let's
business.
talk about that a little bit. The fundraising, the timeline. I'm first of all, what is the timeline to have this built? If I'm not mistaken, I've seen the fencing is already up on
Yeah,
that
we
parking lot,
mobilize in May of this year,
May of
uh,
2024. Okay.
May of 2024, and we will open in the New Year's Eve 2026. That's when
Oh,
we open.
and do you
So
already
it's a
have
3-year build.
do you have in mind the act or musical act that's going to
It'll
hail?
probably be a week-long festival, you
Okay.
know. Yeah, it'll be a big deal. It's really it's a citywide festival, because it is the city. The people that are working in the building every day are existing artists. It's the people's. Music hall is called the People's Theater. I see the new building, and it's just an extension of that mission, and it too will be the people's music building. It has flex spaces, and you can come to downtown Detroit um, without necessarily knowing what you're going to do, because you can go to this building and figure out what you want to do and
Yeah,
go there.
that's great way of putting it. So fundraising, fundraising's
Yeah,
been
fundraising.
difficult for everybody, right? Difficult
Everybody,
for
sure.
nonprofits, and COVID didn't help. And so here you're looking to create a very magnificent, I think I said earlier, structure
It's a
with
$125 million building,
that's
Ara.
all. It's just a couple of dollars,
That's all.
right?
Yeah, it's a big
How is it?
deal.
How's that being perceived for your? I mean, you're a very energetic guy. It's kind of hard to say no, I think, to Vince Paul, but you know, bankers don't maybe see let's see the way that I do on that. How has that been perceived? Fundraising, has it been difficult? Do you get the buy-in for the understanding of
Right.
what this will become?
Yes. It. You know why?
Why?
I think that the building speaks to a truth that
Hmm.
people know. Like, finally, someone is sort of taking that low-hanging fruit and creating an economy around all of our musical legends. Right. Um, when you're dealing with this is being a chunk of the building is being built with using bonds, 501(c)(3) non-for-profit bonds,
Hmm.
and these get issued by the city of Detroit. Then they're underwritten by banks. And
Right.
so you have to go through so many hoops, and feasibility studies and all kinds of people scrutinizing your business plan. And when you come out the other end, and all these third parties agree, yes, I can verify these numbers. This is a very strong idea. And then you have architects like Todd Williams, and you have initial support from Kresge Foundation and Ballmer and Steve Ballmer, and very, very high level credible funders that underwrite the entire pre-construction period with millions and millions of dollars. I think it's because it speaks to a truth. And So the fundraising efforts continue. I think that we'll want to continue fundraising because we want to have a strong war chest when we open, so that we don't have to program um, out of desperation. We want to program in a very strategic way. So we'll always, continue fundraising, but the building's ready to go, so that's good. But I don't want to stop fundraising, I really want us to be able to have the kind of money where we can not subsidize, but kind of subsidize people and artists who want to use the building. We want to be able to help them use the building,
Yeah, no, I think
and that's
that's
yeah, 'cause
true.
I might be a better fundraiser than they are, but they're a great artist,
Right.
so let me help them. I'll use my fundraising skills for you, you know?
Yeah. So if there were final thoughts to give, like outside
I
of what
know
you
I've had this
just
idea in my mind for so many years, Ara, and I thank you for your patience, all those years ago when we served on boards. And because again, this is not just add water idea. This is a very well thought out, lengthy. I came back to Detroit with an agenda,
yeah.
and so you build the building blocks of that agenda, but now you're finally seeing it come to fruition, I think, with the new building and all of the cranes that you see in town, and all the new developments that are in downtown. Believe me, we see that as a result of our efforts of bringing people together into common platforms and finding common ground and where we can work together. That's why Detroit is this American story that I think people should learn from, in Minneapolis and St. Louis. I'm talking to you, you can learn from Detroit, because we've been through trials and tribulations, but we've come out the other side, and we are stepping back out onto the world stage. And if you add on top of that, the driverless car technology that's being developed over by Ford with Lyft in the Michigan Central, we're going to be Detroit worldwide. I have this sweater that I wear around the office sometimes, and it simply says 1928, because it's a metaphor. In 1928, Detroit was capital of the world. We controlled Wall Street and mobility worldwide. And I just think that Detroit's on this trajectory where we're going to be 1928 again.
Yeah, I would agree with you. Vince, I can't think of a better way to end the podcast with those thoughts. I would also thank you on behalf of the artistic world, especially in Detroit. I mean, you've done more for artists than a lot of different organizations can say that, especially the diversity of it. And I think that that's a major accomplishment. And again, like I said a little bit earlier, this is not something that was just overnight. This is something you had a plan, and so
Mm.
I give you a lot of credit for that. So I thank you for allowing me to talk to you a little bit and to hear about the Planet for Music Hall. If folks want to get more information, they can go online at what's the web address, Vince?
Musichall.org.
Very
And you
good.
can, yeah, you'll see the tiles of all the different venues, but you can click on the expansion and that'll take you to that website. And keep an eye, we'll keep it in the paper, and we'll time lapse the new building. And
Looking
there's other
forward to it.
developments happening around us.
Looking forward
Keep
to it.
your eye on Detroit. I'm telling you, here we come, everybody.
Thanks, Vince.
Thank you, Ara.
Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Michigan Creates. We hope you've had fun diving into the creativity of our state. From Motown melodies to artisanal wonders, Michigan never fails to dazzle. But hey, the creativity doesn't stop here. Connect with us online, subscribe to our channel so you don't miss new episodes. Help us spread the word and also share your own artistic stories. So until next time, I'm Ara Topouzian, and I want you to keep those musical instruments in tune, keep those paintbrushes moving, and keep those cameras rolling. Remember, in Michigan, the only limit is your imagination. Stay creative.